Oye, and welcome back. Okay, the last of our videos in this. Now I'm going to show you how to go about doing what I would call the 100% solution, or realistically setting up for how you would do the 100% solution. But remember, it's really ambitious to try and shoot for it, and with the time limits that you have in most competitions, you should probably not aim to go for the 100% solution. That being said, hopefully someday you'll end up in the professional world where the 100% solution may be what your bosses are looking for, and they'll pay you overtime to find it. So we want to make certain that we have all the tools available in our toolbox to work with. Now, we're once again looking here at our percent solution, is how I usually refer to it. Our first video, which was much shorter, covered the simple ones. While the percentages may fluctuate some, you basically have random picks, you have kind of a semi-educated guess, and then you have a educated guess with a hunch. All of those are not great ways of solving problems unless you have pretty much no time. Usually you have at least a little bit of time. The 50% solution, which was what we started with in our second video, is actually one of the best ones to aim for. And most likely, as you get more and more used to this, you want to work towards getting the 80% solution. Usually the old adage goes the 80% solution gets 80% of the way to the perfect solution, has a good chance of being a good outcome, but only requires 20% of the work compared to solving it completely. In fact, honestly, that may be an overestimate. The amount of work you have to do to get the 80% solution is probably still going to be a lot less than the amount of work that you have to do to get the 100% solution, at least with the tools we're using. I will say this is where programming comes into play, and while that is outside of the rules allowed by Stellar Explorers and the intent of my particular scenarios, in real life I'm certain employers would love if you had the skills to actually program this in. The 100% solution, the only way that you want to approach it is by programming it in most cases, and getting a computer to solve all the different possibilities for you. And I'll show you why, at least from my way of setting this up. However, and I want to reiterate this, that is against the rules of fair play for the Stellar Explorers program, at least at the time of the filming of this video, and I honestly don't expect them to change it ever, honestly. While programming is an excellent skill, programming is not the point of this particular program, Stellar Explorers. The point of it is to teach engineering problem-solving skills, the things that we're developing here, and also learning about aerospace programs and space systems and technology. The more we rely on programming, the more this becomes just a fun game of program numbers in and watch an answer fall out without necessarily knowing why you end up with the good solutions. Okay. My disclaimer out of the way, the 100% solution. Let's take a look at that. So I'm going to skip ahead. The 80% solution gave us a pretty good prediction on how our scores were going to turn out. But now we want to go to the 100% solution. It's a full test, and I put this in bold in all caps. It is time consuming. You don't want to aim for this unless you've got a really low set of combinations. The 64 different solutions on this, you might be able to do this scenario in the 6 hours. Remember, the 6 hours also includes your academic quiz, reading the briefing, and then working through all of that. If it was just 6 hours working with, okay, you have everything set and ready to go, you could probably solve all 64 solutions. However, Mars or Bust, for instance, had nearly 500, I think, different solutions. By the time you get to that point, it's not feasible for you to solve it with the 100% solution in the time you have allotted. That's why I can't stress this enough. All teams should aim for the 80% solution as a matter of policy. But I want to show you the 100% solution. Okay, here's where we're finally going to use those exported CSVs to track exactly when and how much data is added and removed from your drive. This tells you, and I want to emphasize this, if you set it up properly, exactly what's going to happen. Now, the pros of this are it can give you the absolute best solution, but there are a bunch of cons on this, and I start with the most important one. It just takes a ridiculous amount of time, and it's tedious, and it's boring for pretty much everyone. That's why it's great if you can actually, within the rules, which you can't, program it into a computer, because setting it up to program and letting the computer do the tedious work is wonderful. That's partly what spreadsheets do, but spreadsheets don't think for you. They only run through numbers that you set up faster. Okay, The other thing that I want to emphasize on this is we're about to see a whole mess of calculations, and if you mess up any of those calculations, just one of them, and there are a bunch of them, then whatever answer it kicks out may actually be worse than you doing the 50 or especially the 80% solution. In the real world, engineering is usually, you're going to take the 25 to 50% for quick estimates on how to do the job. If you're going to set up for a quick back of the envelope is the way that we phrase it, calculation to do some rough predictions. 80% solutions and builds are usually, as long as they're within appropriate tolerances, you add in some wiggle room. If you think that you need exactly 6 gallons of gas for it to work, then add 8 gallons into the tank, and you're probably covering any things that you may have overlooked. But the 80% solution dominates in a lot of real-world applications, and that's why I recommend it. But sometimes you need the 100% solution. And we're talking about space. NASA is exactly the sort of place where the 100% solution is going to be important, because you're so limited on resources and what you can do that you got to get the absolute best out of it. Okay. For the 80%, or this was my 80% solution, and with this, I could go through and use it to get an estimate as to what is a good solution. Having the 80% combined with the 100% can be a great way to approach it. But here's what we need. I need to keep a running total of exactly what's on my hard drive. In my 80% solution, I estimated by saying, okay, normally I add 8 used during one large cycle, and I can remove them during 5 contacts, so I can estimate that this is what's going to happen. But that's just an estimation. When we go back into the reports, we know that I don't always have 44 or 40 minutes of contact. Some of them are less, and some of them are actually a little bit more. So for me to know the exact values, I have to pull the exact values. So here's the other tab that you didn't necessarily see. This is that access report. I pulled it and brought it in, importing my CSV. So I exported the CSV from STK, and I imported that same CSV into Sheets, or in this case, Excel. I did my work on it, and what I ended up doing, everywhere where you see the green and white stripes, Excel did that automatically when it brought in the report. I've added some things over here. I've marked this my selections, data rate, and it's pulling from a tab that I call scoring. So let's go over to my scoring. Here's how I've set it up. I have a spot where, and if you check my lessons for the A series, I show you how to do this with a nested if statement, and in Sheets you can put a little checkbox there that you can click instead of putting a 1. The checkboxes, by my experience, don't work as well in Excel, so I'm using 1 for true and 0 or empty for false. So I'm saying true, I want scanner A. And I've copied over the new, I believe, updated numbers that I had put in for my fake scenario over here. So once again, these numbers do not match the real scenario score. You're going to have to do that. But in my original document, this was exactly the scoring stuff that we had. Okay, so what do? I can use this to select whichever configuration I want. I can do scanner A, hard drive A, and transmitter A, and then I've got a spot here where it actually pulls whatever I've selected. So let me show that in case you haven't seen it. I can remove the 1 here, and then it freaks out because I haven't selected anything, but then I can put a 1 next to scanner C, and we see that it's actually pulling this instead. Okay, so I've got it where for my total mass, I've got it adding up the mass of whatever my selections are, and that'll change based on whatever I put my 1 next to. And my total cost, I get that by adding up all of my selected costs. My secured minutes are coming from that other tab. We're going to come back to that in just a moment. And here's where I start having it where I find the points based on my minutes, or my data score, is what I should actually mark this. This is actually left over from before I even wrote the mission brief, so I came up with different words for it when I got to the mission brief. I haven't bothered updating this, but this might actually better say data score. Here's my bonus/penalties, and I have those being calculated up here with some calculations where I look at my total weight and compare it to the maximum weight, and then incur the penalty if my total weight is greater than the maximum weight. Right now, it's not, so I'm getting 0. And I've got it where my total budget, my cost, is beneath my max allowed cost, and so I'm getting a small bonus, and I've got it programmed in to actually calculate up that bonus. Or penalty if in fact I end up going over budget. We'll see that. But here's what I got. These are the selections that show down here, and I use whatever numbers are in these spots to actually run all of my calculations, not only on this page, but also on this page. Please note, data rate went from 10 to 20 because it's saying I'm going to pull whatever is in the scoring tab in E13. So E13 is right here. That's the data rate of the scanner that I select. So it says 20 right now. How about I delete that and go up to scanner D? It now says 30. So when I change that, it'll automatically pull my data rate. It's also going to automatically pull whatever hard drive capacity I've selected and whatever transmitter I've selected. So here's where I can do my controlling on this page, and back over here is where it pulls those numbers to actually find some things out. What have I got over here? I have a marking that makes sense to me. Once again, I should put comments in, but it's something that makes sense to me, and I've only created this document for myself because I'm being selfish. I'm calling this D0. In physics terms, when you put a zero beneath something, that's basically what it is at the beginning of your, in this case, cycle. This column represents what is on my hard drive at the beginning of whichever contact I'm in. These are my contacts with the ground station and when I can offload things. So my very first one I took by taking the beginning of the scenario time and solving for it, that at least with a scan rate of 30 megabytes per minute and 131 minutes from the beginning of my scenario to my first contact, I should have on my hard drive just under 4 gigs worth of data. Now my capacity is 15, so I'm fine on that. And then I have removed maximum in megabytes. So here's what I've done. I say my stop time minus my start time. That's how much time I'm in contact. I could have also just taken the duration here, but I felt like being fancy. Multiplying that by 1,440. Again, watch my other videos, the lessons that go along with this, if you want to know why I'm using those numbers. But I'm basically taking the duration of the contact and multiplying it by E7. This is my transmit rate. This is the amount of data that I'm going to remove from beginning contact here to end contact here based on the rate that I've selected. So I start off on my drive with just under 4 gigs, and based on my transmitter and contact time in this contact, I can remove 4.4 gigs. Okay. Also, while I'm scanning, I'm also going to add during that period, I take that same time period and multiply it by my scan rate, because remember, while I'm transmitting the data down, I'm still also actively collecting data, so I'm going to look at how much more data I add on to it. Now, this would get even more complex if my transmit rate weren't greater than my add rate. I know, as long as I know what's ever on the hard drive when I start, I begin transmitting it, and even though I'm adding more in, I know that I'm removing it faster than I'm adding it, so I can just look at what I started with, what I add during that time period, and how much I actually pull back off of the drive, and I should have a pretty good idea of how much I can actually remove here. So in this case, I remove the full amount that my transmitter is capable of, because it turns out that I started off with 4 gigs, just under 4 gigs on my hard drive, and during my transmission period, I'm going to add another 1.3 gigs. Well, that brings me up to about 5.3, maybe 5.2 gigs total of data that I would have up into the end of my first contact. But I can only offload 4,428 megabytes, or about 4.4 gigs. So since I download all of that, I've got this programmed in with an if statement where it basically says, if the amount that I started with and the amount that I add are more than what I actually can transmit, then return whatever I can transmit. If they are less than whatever I can transmit, that means that I could transmit more, but I don't have enough data there, so that transmission isn't actually useful. So I have it then say, okay, if they're greater than, return the maximum amount that I can transmit, or if they're less than, then only return the amount of data that I actually have, which is an important thing that you have to put in. So it's checking for the lesser of those two numbers to represent real life. Okay, so this is how much I can remove. It turns out that the total amount of data I have is greater than what I can remove. So I get all the data that I can transmit down, and I leave 46 megs left over on my hard drive. I get this by taking the total amount that was on the drive plus how much I added minus whatever I've sent down to Mars. Whatever's left is what's now on my drive at the beginning of the next cycle. So I then take the gap. So at the end of this, to the beginning of the next contact, some time has passed, and I've been collecting for every minute of that 30 megabytes of data. So I take that, find that amount, that's the amount that I've added during the gap, and I add on whatever I had at the end of the last cycle, my final data, D1, and I add on whatever I've gotten between the two cycles by using the gap. Here's where you could use the gap report, but honestly, importing another report is just a pain. I can do what I did in the lesson video by using the timestamps in the access report to get exactly what I need. Okay, so I'm basically doing a running total. I start off this time with 5 gigs on the hard drive. The max that I can transmit on this is 4.4. I add another 1,300, and so I secure 4.4 gigs, and now I have left over on my hard drive just under 2 gigs. We can see actually that even with this setup that I've selected here, I'm not keeping up. I'm slowly overloading my drive. And eventually I'm going to max out my drive. In fact, it says here, okay, you can see I go from what I started on my drive is about 9 gigs, and I'm adding enough on here that I actually max out the drive. We start seeing 15 gigs, and it never goes below 15 gigs. This is my clue that this is not a good solution because I'm actually dropping a lot of data. I'm not offloading the data fast enough to actually get all of my data, which means I'm losing a bunch of data because I just don't have enough room on my hard drive. Okay, well that corresponds with these made-up numbers to a score of about 72.5. Not a great solution, and it doesn't surprise me. That being said, I know that my issue is my transmitter isn't keeping up. So how about I jump up my transmitter to the third option? Pretty powerful. Let's see what I get there. Ooh, I went up to 106 points. Look at me go. I am not overweight. I am not over budget because I've made up random numbers on this. That might not be true in the actual scenario. But now I've upped my transmission rate, and I maxed out the drive here at 15 gigs, but if you look, I don't keep it maxed out. In fact, the reason that I'm going to periodically max it out is because of the dark periods where I have to put a bunch onto the drive. If it's mostly full, I may not have room for all the data that I want to add on there, but now my transmission rate is high enough that when it gets maxed out, when I get back to the regular cycles, I can actually start removing it at a decent rate. Now, I'm not going to talk too much more about the actual numbers here. This is me walking you through how I've set up something that should, assuming I haven't made any mistakes in my calculations or my programming, give me an idea of exactly how much data is on the drive at the beginning of one contact and how much I secure and how much data is on the drive at the end of that contact. So I have a running total. At the bottom, this is my column of all the data that I have secured back on the surface of Mars. Well, that's the thing that I need. So I'm going to call that secured data. That's in megabytes. But now I need to turn that into minutes because I'm actually getting points based on minutes. So I take my total number of megabytes and I divide it back by my original scan rate because I know that the amount of minutes I got was 30 megabytes per minute. So now to get my minutes back, I have to divide by whatever that value was. And notice that I'm calling it from this cell. So when I go and select something different, it will automatically fix and use the correct number. So on this, I am securing about 17,000 minutes. Now I know that the total number of minutes is about 20,000 minutes, so I've dropped some minutes, which doesn't surprise me because again, I periodically max out my drive, so I know I'm dropping some data, but I'm still getting the majority of it, which is why my score is still pretty decent because I'm getting a whole bunch of them. Okay, so this by itself means that if you've got 64 different solutions and you need this entire page to calculate one of them, either you need 64 of these pages and you got to program all that in, That sounds like a pain. Or you need to go through and have someone keep track when you say, okay, if I go with 1, 1, 1, my score was 72. If I go with 4, 1, 3, my score is 106, and you can go through and try and manually find the score for every one of them. When you find the highest one, if you've programmed it correctly, you have your 100% solution. But that'll take forever. It's time consuming. So the last thing that I'm going to say, now that we've introduced how to do the 100% solution, but we can now see that it's still going to be a ridiculous amount of time and effort. And that's after I programmed all of these things in, assuming I programmed them correctly. But here's where the 80% solution can help us. Because the 80% solution isn't giving us the exact number. In fact, when we did 111, our 80% solution predicted that we were getting a score of about 97, when in reality, because we were just relying on the estimates and not the actual full values involved, we can find out that if we go with, 111, sorry, never mind, we end up with a score of about 98. So we end up with, fairly close, but notice that it's off. If I were to go to the, 144, I should get about 90 points according to the 80% solution. So 144, let's check that real quick. Here's how you can use the 80% solution and the setup of your 100% solution to actually, 4. I need to put a 1 next to the 4, not a 4. I'm seeing about 91 points. Again, very close to my 80% solution. Is it exact? No. In fact, I think that this is the correct score, but I can check a couple of these and I can see that for the most part, my 80% solution is still giving me the correct ballpark. So what I can do is I can go and I can find the best solutions in here. Hey, here's one that's 116. That's scanner D, drive A, and transmitter D. So that's 414 at least with my random made up numbers. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to try that. 4, no, I keep doing that. 4, 1, and then 4. Great. And now I can see, hey, look, 118 points. I may not have time to check every one of the 100% solutions, but if I have set up the 80% solution, I can have an informed approach on the things that I need to check. Now, am I guaranteed that the 80% solution, the highest one in that, is the highest one in the 100%? No, because there are still some estimates in that. And that's why, hopefully, if you set this up in an appropriate amount of time, you can use the 80% solution to aim for the highest ones in here, and odds are good, when you check them over here, go with the highest on that, there's a decent chance that that's actually the best solution, without having to check everything fully. So how could you do this? Well, you don't need STK for that much amount of time, and you are allowed 2 computers for your competition. Maybe have one computer working on developing the 80% solution, and one computer setting up for the 100% solution. I don't know. It's up to you. All right, I think that's the majority of the material that I wanted to cover, and at some point I need to go to bed. I also need to write tests for one of my classes coming up later this week. So hopefully you found that useful. Until next time.